Hi, I'm Deb Havens. Welcome to Kent County Close-Up. As we record this show at the end of 2018, the health of our drinking water has become even more precarious. The Michigan legislature is in lame duck session, where GOP members have pushed through significant deregulation of PFAS contaminants. Just last week, Wolverine Worldwide pulled out of a pre-trial settlement with Plainfield and Algoma townships that would have provided municipal water to homes with PFAS-contaminated wells. Today, we're talking about concerns for safe water with Dr. Rick Rediske, Professor of Water Resources at the Grand Valley State University Annis Water Resources Institute, and Elaine Sterrett Isley, Director of Water Programs for the West Michigan Environmental Action Council, or WMEAC. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And Dr. Rediske, let's start with you and the work of the Annis Water Resources Institute. What is the role of the Institute, and how did you first identify concerns with water contaminants in northern Kent County?
Well, the Annis Water Resources Institute is a arm of Grand Valley State University, and we specialize in freshwater resources, research and also public outreach concerning water. And my area of expertise is contaminants, so I study contaminants in water, contaminants in sediment, contaminants in fish. And I became involved with the PFAS working for a citizens group when I was looking at all the chemicals that were at the tannery.
Now, the Michigan legislature recently introduced Senate Bill 1244, and that would significantly increase the amount of PFAS that people are exposed to. And whether or not Republican Governor Rick Snyder signs that bill into law, help us understand the danger that is posed by removing regulations.
Well, back in the late 80s, there was a expert panel convened by the DEQ, and we came up with something called Rule 57, and that's a way we can incorporate the latest and best research into our water quality standards. And at the time, we thought that was really important because of the Great Lakes. And you know, the water is such an important part of Michigan blue economy, and we wanted to have the best standards we could as far as protecting the Great Lakes. So we put in place a system where we could take the most current data that's available and then develop water quality regulations according to that. So there was kind of an annual or every couple of years an update process where we would look at the new numbers. The 1244 makes us go back to the IRIS database, which is EPA's integrated risk assessment database, and that's very old information. They only update 1 or 2 compounds every year, and probably 90% of the information in there is over 10 years old. So it's setting up an old standard instead of the latest information. Like for PCBs, it's 1994 data.
Oh my gosh.
Cadmium is 1989 or something like that. So it's really old information, and if you were to query toxicologists, they would say that that's not the best information. There are better databases out there. So
seems like if you talk to the person on the street, we would say the same thing. Well, Elaine, let me turn to you because I understand that the West Michigan Environmental Action Council has been equally concerned about the impact of PFAS. Tell us how the WMEAC water programs play a role, which you direct.
Sure. So I joined WMEAC in 2012, and our water programs focus on education and advocacy to individuals, decision makers, pretty much anyone in West Michigan about what they can do to help make their water quality better. And we focus on things like stormwater runoff. We've been looking at water trails to connect the recreational user to understanding water quality issues. The last summer we did a project with Michigan Environmental Council and Michigan State University looking at the value of the dunes, because the land is really important to what happens on the water. We got involved with the PFAS issue. We were brought in by the citizens group up in Rockford in looking at the Wolverine Worldwide tannery teardown. So the tannery teardown had already happened, but the citizens group had expressed some concerns about how the materials had been disposed of, why the citizens weren't getting notice of what was happening with this. And the city of Rockford and Wolverine Worldwide really kind of painted them as the rabble-rousers, that they were just stirring up the pot and they really weren't, there was nothing for anybody to be worried about. And so we kind of came in to give them a voice, to get them a seat at the table. That was actually when we connected in with Rick. I actually did my graduate work at the Annis Water Resources Institute. Rick was one of my advisors. So, so WMEAC does try to bring the science into these advocacy and educational pieces as well. But what we've been doing now with PFAS specifically, since we are not issue experts in that, is we're trying to provide information. And so we have created FAQs, frequently asked questions page on our website, and then we've been talking with Rick about other ways that we can help get more engagement with the community.
Well, obviously, what's going on in lame duck right now is a concern. Well, I mean, to both of you, I'm sure, and to many, many Michiganders who are kind of fearful of what is going to be the outcome of some of this legislation. You talked about an alternative through your partnership that I thought it would be interesting for us to discuss today. So, citizens who thought that they were expressing their opinion through the vote have kind of seen that go topsy-turvy. But how do you feel citizens can still have a voice in making decisions about safe water? And let's start with some background here. Rick, you've been involved for a number of years with Muskegon Lake and White Lake public advisory councils. And as I understand it, they've made important contributions, those groups have, to cleaning up those bodies of water. So tell us a little bit about how a public advisory council actually works.
Well, both the EPA and the federal government, even the International Joint Commission, which is the United States and Canada, all agree that cleanups and restoration activities with respect to water work best when the public's involved. So they want a process that's driven sort of from the bottom up rather than dictated from the top down. So it's important to get all the stakeholders together and to come up with a vision for that cleanup. And both the White Lake and the Muskegon Lake Public Advisory Councils were set up to develop community-based visions and then to work with the regulatory agencies, work with the Corps of Engineers, public and private sector partners, universities, a whole diverse group of stakeholders to come up with the solutions and then work on the implementation of those solutions. So it's a long-term process, 20 plus years, but it ensures the public is involved in every step.
That's kind of counter to what's going on right now in Lansing, right? Very
much so. And to date, PFAS is really generated top down. Everything is coming out of either Lansing or the federal government. And there's a lot of concerns in the individual communities, but they're really not organized, and the communities don't have the opportunity to work together to develop programs for education and whatever we need to do to resolve the issue.
So now I understand, Elaine, you and Rick have teamed up to kind of create a citizens group that might be able to move beyond the EPA and that top-down approach right now. And it's based, as I understand it, on the Muskegon Lake and White Lake PAC concept. Can you speak to that?
Sure, and this is something that Rick has been pushing because of his experience working with those two PACs. So the idea would be that we could get some sort of citizens advisory group. Apparently there's a couple of different ways that can be achieved, either through the EPA or through the state, and they have different focuses. Right now the EPA has agreed that they should look at setting up what they call a citizens advisory group, not a PAC. PAC is a little, it's structured differently, but it will focus on Wolverine Worldwide. So it doesn't address PFAS at the state level. And because it's the EPA and the EPA doesn't have PFAS listed as a regulated toxin, we have some concerns about how much we can actually focus on the PFAS issue itself.
Okay, so that sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare. How do you really approach that situation? You're not going to be, well, EPA, as I understand it from you, Rick, has a structure that is in place already so that citizens can participate, but you may be talking about creating something outside of that that you're in the process of making up as you go, kind of.
Well,
do I have that right?
Yeah, I don't think we're making it up.
No.
We're really looking at successful models in the past and trying to come up with a good framework to build off of. And the community advisory group is something that's set up for the Superfund program. So if you have a very seriously contaminated site, that ensures that the community gets to participate in the monitoring programs, the dissemination of information, whatever is decided as far as legal actions, what are the concerns of the people, making sure those are implemented in monitoring and cleanup actions. So that's only a small part of what's going on in Kent County, unfortunately. And the Wolverine piece is House Street, the Wolven Jewel area, and the tannery, and then there's some fringing cottages along the Rogue River. So that's that one piece. There's also Plainfield Township, State Disposal, Boulder Creek, the Kent County Airport, Lax Industries. So it extends, quite a distance across the county. And rather than have smaller groups together, when you have that number of issues, it's better to have one community-based organization that covers the whole county. So we're looking at that to look at infrastructure needs, to just make PFAS an item that's discussed and we plan for and bring in the necessary resources to address.
Elaine, because your organization is so focused on education, do you have a relationship with Kent County and how they are responding to perhaps with questions about this situation and how it can be helped?
We've had some conversation with them, although not a lot. That is something that this advisory group would bring into that. We would bring in the county. We would have the county's voice. We would have a voice for Wolverine and the city of Rockford, the airport, as Rick was saying. That the whole idea is to bring all the parties to the table. What we're seeing at WMEAC is that even people, for example, in Rockford, who are well educated and understand how to find information, they're not finding the information they want about PFAS. And people are scared. Rightfully so. They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
They don't know what they need to worry about. And so just providing that venue for them to be able to ask these questions and to provide more scientific feedback on the health effects, on the drinking water, on the soils. All of those things are going to be helpful to people. We're hoping that the county will remain engaged.
Now, is this something that the county actually, if you went to the county and said, we'd like to do this, we'd like to create this kind of a group, is it in their power to grant something like that, or do you have to have sanctions from the state or from the EPA for that matter?
There's always a challenge in doing this, even from our perspective. How do we spend the number of hours on this issue if we have no funding for it? So the Citizens Advisory Group may come with some limited funding from the EPA, but WMEAC is looking for other sources of funding, and I know Rick secured some funding through Grand Valley to try and move this issue forward. I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and all of the funders are wanting to talk about what's happening with PFAS. So I'm hoping that means that we'll be able to find some private foundation funding, which I'm hoping will then also relieve the restrictions on can we or can we not talk about PFAS.
Oh, okay. Well, take for a moment and explain what would the funding provide. Why do you need funding to create a public advisory council?
Because it takes time to staff it. And whether it's WMEAC staffing it or Grand Valley staffing it or a combination of partners, it's going to take a lot of time. And while WMEAC works for West Michigan, we still tend to require funding to focus on those specific issues. Most of the things that I do come from a grant. We do have some general operating funds. WMEAC has been around for 50 years, and so there is an expectation in the community that people can bring general questions to us, and we do the best that we can to answer those. I actually hire a policy intern to help me do research because, you know, we could be the biggest brains on the planet, and I'm not going to be able to answer every question that walks in the door.
Well, and there are a lot of issues.
There are.
There's so many things to be concerned about. One of the things that strikes me is that would be of value in creating this kind of an organization, if it really does make a difference in a cleanup approach to this PFAS issue. Rick, you mentioned before that restoration in Muskegon actually improved home values.
Right, we had a study where we received $10 million, and that sounds like a lot of money, and it certainly is, to put in restoration to restore the shoreline, to restore habitats, and that was keyed to almost $50 million in increased property values over a 10-year period.
Oh,
so,
that is remarkable.
So the return on the federal money was 5 times, and that continues to increase as, you know, more people come to the shore, more people use the lake. And right now there's a stigma, and rightfully so, about PFAS foam. We have to address all those issues and get people, you know, back down to the Rogue River. And I guess to further expand on what Elaine was saying, one of the first things the PAC does is put together a data archive. So right now, if you want information on a site, you've got to either wait till somebody writes about it in the paper or try and go through FOIA to get the information. We would have a file on each one of the sites, like House Street, like the tannery, and we would maintain that. We would have a monthly update on what's going on at each of those sites, and probably quarterly we would invite the site manager, Wolverine, and the state to come and address the public in terms of what they're doing. So it's just a way to take the cleanup and the restoration out of the paper and just put it in everybody's hands so we all have input on what's going on.
Well, so
can I make a quick
sure,
clarification? I'm a co-author on the paper, so
Yes.
I worked on the Muskegon Lake project. That was actually post-grad school. But the 5-to-1 return isn't just on the housing values. That was also in recreational values for visits to, visit Muskegon Lake. So it was a much bigger look. The study included housing values, what's called travel costs. So how much did it cost you to come to Muskegon Lake? How often do you come to Muskegon Lake? And then we did also a survey asking people what their willingness to spend if there was these improvements made. So it was a little bit broader than just the property values, and that's really important because since my time at the Annis Water Resources Institute, I've done a lot of work on valuing things that are not necessarily market value and tangible. So we call those ecosystem services. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
No, I appreciate that. So, but in that instance, Muskegon Lake and White Lake were declared a Superfund site?
Well, they were declared an area of concern.
Area of
this was
concern.
recognized by both the U.S. and Canada.
Oh my.
So there's 43 areas that have enough contamination, enough degradation that they need to be restored before the Great Lakes can be looked at as being restored.
And so how does that compare with the House Street, Belmont area?
Well, I think if you look at the number of sites that are in Grand Rapids, we have degradation of our groundwater, and that was one of the beneficial use impairments for the area of concern. We have restrictions on fish consumption, and then there's how do we clean it up? There's just a lot of questions, and it's not quite as big as the Muskegon Lake or the White Lake area of concern, but it's of sufficient size that a single community action group cannot handle.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I was not involved in the PACs, but they also had information about beneficial use impairments, like what was it, can you eat the fish, is it in the soil, is it the water quality? And we don't have those kind of things really in any organized way for these sites.
And that's exactly true. The designation of an area of concern is a formal recognition.
Yes.
And that's what the state has to formally recognize that they need to have a PAC. We can form a different organization, but there were, probably 10 different environmental organizations in the city of Muskegon that handled various parts. And the state decided to recognize public advisory councils as a means to organize stakeholders and then proceed to cleanup. So they actually formed a statewide public advisory council. So Muskegon, White Lake, Kalamazoo, Detroit River, Saginaw Bay, we were all together and we could share ideas and work out the best solutions.
Right,
so,
and that certainly seems important
right.
given that all
we
of
have
the
Wordsmith
sites.
Air Force Base, and
Right.
some areas may have more resources than others, and this allows us to share that across.
Right.
Okay, so I can see why you think that the PAC model is workable. Well, where are you in the stage of perhaps getting the state to declare an area of concern? Is that fundamental to moving forward with this?
Well, I think that the state has to decide that this approach is valid. And I think that the first step is on the 23rd. The EPA is coming to, 23rd of January, the EPA is coming to Rockford, and they're going to be talking about forming the Citizens Advisory Group. So that's the first recognition that we need to get the public involved. And then the next step is to look at, it's not only this site, but it's Boulder Creek and the airport and Lax Industries. It's spread out through the whole county. And then we've got a site now in Ottawa County, so maybe we can combine, come up with a larger area and all share resources to look at the cleanup and then, or look at the investigation and cleanup.
So if we were talking about an area of concern, would you think that would focus on Kent County, or would it be broader than that?
Well, I think you could have, Kent County obviously has the most, but there's some smaller sites in Muskegon and some smaller sites in Ottawa County, and we could easily have a tri-county advisory commission.
That's kind of bad news, but I guess if it helps get it going, that would be great. So you're organizing then right now to pull in other groups that could be part of this request to the state.
Yes.
And do you make a formal, write a letter, or do you all go to Lansing, or how does that happen?
Well, I'll go to Rockford on the 23rd.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
No, I mean, we're still trying to work through with some of our partners what capacity they can participate in. A lot of the organizations in West Michigan that are focusing on water quality in the Rockford area or along the Grand River, I mean, we're a 501c3, but they have governmental ties, and they may have less ability to do some of the things that we want to do.
Well, and here's a question for total speculation, but do you think we have a better chance at having state approval of something like this with a new Democratic governor?
Well,
okay, maybe we won't go there.
No, I think anytime you have a change in administration, you have a fresh look at everything.
Yeah.
And I think the MPART, the PFAS action group that Governor Snyder put together was really good at identifying problems. And now I think we need to involve the citizens and solve them. So I think it's a natural next step to the whole process. And I think the EPA coming to town saying that they want to recognize the public in the cleanup of House Street and Wolverine Tannery, that's a big step.
Well, that would be huge.
Right. And the governor-elect did run on, part of her campaign was on improving water infrastructure. And a lot of that focus was on Flint, but PFAS was definitely part of that conversation as well.
Right. Well, let's say that the EPA does come to town and wants to really get people organized into this kind of a public advisory council or whatever it will be called.
Right.
What's the timeline that you could anticipate something like that would be formed?
Well, the EPA's timeline is to have a citizens advisory group, have the study done and one in place. It looks like in the summer, so in July, August timeframe, and I think we would want to build from there, and maybe by the end of the year to have something for the state, but or for the overall Kent County. But I think we're going to have to just engage our representatives and engage the new leaders of the DEQ, and they really support watershed groups, and they really support public advisory councils, and this is just borrowing the best from both of those concepts and coming up with something to address PFAS.
So if people want to assist you in this effort, what can they do? Can they write to legislators, or is there some kind of information accessible to them that they could check out so that they know what they're talking about, number one?
Well, I think the best thing is to show that you're interested in being part of the solution.
Right.
And if more people start to organize, I think coming to the 23rd, the meeting on the 23rd is really good. And we just have to build from there, because as long as you're organized in a manner where you're working toward a solution, that will get a lot more traction than sitting on the fringe and complaining about.
Right.
And rightfully now, we don't have that information. I mean, we don't have the information in terms of what's going on at the sites, and people are concerned, and they think something's being hidden from them, and we just need to get the process more out in the open.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm really interested in is bringing in some training for our physicians, because people are, this is the biggest difference between the area of concern is we didn't deal with health issues. This was all environmental issues, so we need to look at a model of how we can train physicians in Kent County to respond to people's questions.
Well, that's a very interesting point. So just for a moment there, what kinds of information do you think physicians are lacking?
Well, my goal would be to bring in somebody from MSU or University of Michigan and actually have a presentation on these are the effects of PFAS. This is what we know from a medical standpoint. These are the types of tests that should be run. Just get the information out so people can have dialogues with their primary care physician, and it could be done through one of the hospitals, it could be recorded, and it could be given for continuing education credit. But just have a couple nationally known people, physicians, come to Grand Rapids and talk to our community, and they could also engage with the public too.
And does WMEAC have plans for future initiatives to try to help people get more informed about this, whatever you both can create for the future here?
That's still to be determined. We're definitely doing what we can to provide information. We're sharing information about all of the meetings and all of the webinars, any of the reports that are coming out. So we're committed to sharing information. We're looking at how we're going to build this into our water and climate change and other water and educational programs going forward.
Oh, I'm sure you have big agendas, and
this could take over everybody's work. I mean, this is a big issue.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge,
Yeah.
and everybody is concerned about it. I mean, you cannot talk to anyone who hasn't heard about water issues, which, again, you think, Michigan, if we want to bring people here, if we want businesses here, if we want employees moving to take jobs here, we have to deal with this. I don't think there's any mystery there. So,
no, but there's still a lot of people who don't really truly understand the importance of our impact on the water. They still believe that solution is the solution, that we have so much water in Michigan we don't have to worry about it. And it's just a lack of understanding. It would be thrilling for me to not have a job anymore because they don't need me, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
I don't either, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we've done such an investment at WMEAC. Not my programming, this is our environmental education programming, in educating the children, starting young and having them understand how they connect to their watershed and to the land and the water.
So I'm presuming that you have a great deal of information on your website if people wanted more. In particular, if they'd like to know more about the January 23rd meeting, is that on Facebook?
I don't think I have all of the details of that yet. So do they have a Facebook page? Or?
I think they do.
Okay.
And the EPA has a page for the Rockford site. And so does the MDEQ on the MPART site. And the information is on both of those websites.
Okay, that's great.
Right.
That's very helpful. All right. Well, I certainly wish the best to both of you because you're acting on behalf of all of us as you push forward on citizen input on this. So I really want to thank you for your efforts, and I really want to have you back at some point so we can kind of update on the progress and maybe, hopefully, progress as we move forward on this issue. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
That's it for Kent County Close-Up. I'm Deb Havens, and I'm here with the production team from GRTV Television in Grand Rapids. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so now we're just supposed to...